So let me show you the new sleazy trick that has been fine-tuned over the past couple years or maybe couple decades by corrupt corporate judges and politicians and lawyers. This is a really fascinating trick. So Li Fong tweeted about this. A D.C. Circuit Court upholds federal court decision blocking rule to require drug companies to disclose prices in direct-to-consumer ads. The court says the rule violates the pharmaceutical industry's First Amendment rights by compelling speech. And then he also says, last month, a different federal judge blocked a rule prohibiting certain forms of debt collection during the COVID-19 emergency. The decision similarly argued that the rule blocked the debt collection industry's First Amendment commercial speech rights. Okay, so listen, everybody knows this about me. In fact, this is one of the criticisms I get from a lot of my fellow lefties who agree with me on other things, but not necessarily this issue. I'm a free speech absolutist. I'm a free speech bro. You could call me that, and I'm perfectly comfortable with it. But I believe in free speech for human beings, for individuals. I believe in the right to freedom of speech. There is certainly no right of corporations to free speech because they're not people. In order to say corporations have free speech rights, the implication of that, the underlying assumption, the premise is they have the same rights as human beings. But they don't. They're not human beings. So now you're having what I think is a genuine bastardization of the First Amendment and free speech issues. It's leaking into a corporate cover story. Like, this is a thin, pathetic rationale that corporations are using to be corrupt and to commit crimes. That's what this is. So let's go through it again here. A court basically decided that a rule, and I believe it's a Trump administration rule, it's one of the few good things he did. It's a rule that requires drug companies to disclose their prices in the ads. And this way, like, the idea behind it is, if everybody knows what you're charging, you can't rip off as much as you would if you kind of hid it and only the people who get the drug know. So you got to tell the world how much this costs. And, you know, it's a way to try to force them to, in a roundabout way, be a little more fair. Now, will that work? I don't know. Maybe a little bit it would work, but it's certainly better than not having that rule. Really, in other developed countries, they don't have pharmaceutical ads, period. Because the idea is, why would you advertise for a medicine that somebody needs when they're sick? Like, no, the person would go to the doctor would say, here's the medicine for you, and that's it. To advertise for it is very weird. To make it like a consumer good when it's more of like a matter of necessity. So other countries don't even have pharmaceutical ads. We have them here because we're crazy. And then, so the rule was, all right, well, you have to say how much it costs in the ad. And then the judge says, no, that's compelling speech, and that violates their First Amendment rights. But by that logic, any kind of basic bare minimum consumer protections violates the First Amendment rights of corporations. So you can never have, you know, it's like when you watch the pharmaceutical ads and they have to say, here are the side effects, here are the potential side effects. Under this logic, they would say that's unconstitutional too, because you're forcing them to say something, but they have the free speech rights to say whatever they want, so you can't force them to say something that they don't want to say. So in other words, consumer protection is out the window, not a concept that exists, not a concept that should exist, because these corporations have free speech rights, and you're violating that. I think this is absolute insanity. It's insanity. And then the second one he said here, a different federal judge blocked a rule prohibiting certain forms of debt collection during COVID-19 emergency. So, the government said, listen, it's an emergency. People have no money. They're losing their jobs. We need to put a temporary pause on debt collection. And a court said, you cannot do that. You're not allowed to do that because that violates the collection industry's First Amendment commercial speech rights. So in other words, they have the right to harass you for their money. They have the right to pester you even if you lost your job, even if you have no money in the bank. They have the right to pester you. So you see what they're doing? They're taking the issue of free speech and now they're expanding it to corporations. And now corporations will do all sorts of unscrupulous, evil, greedy actions, and then they'll be able to hide behind the fact, hey man, I have free speech rights. But you don't. Like, again, the whole point of the First Amendment is individuals have freedom of speech. Corporations most certainly do not. Which is why it should be the case that there have to be warnings with the sales of certain products. You see what I'm saying? There have to be warnings. By this logic, why can't they eliminate all, the age requirement to buy alcohol, 21 years old? If a company says, I want to advertise to 14-year-olds. Under this logic, you couldn't block the alcohol company from trying to advertise to 14-year-olds. Because they say, this is my free speech rights. I have the ability to advertise to whoever I want. You can't tell me not to say that because this is my free speech rights. Like, again, if you stretch this argument to its logical conclusion, it's ridiculous. You can't say they have a right to say whatever they want, because then, again, fraud would be legal. They could lie to you about the product. And then you say, hey, man, that's not right. You're committing fraud. And the response from the court could be, they have a First Amendment right. You can't compel speech, and they have commercial speech rights. So if they want to tell you that this magic pill will save your life, even though there's no evidence of it, who are we to say no? They have every right under the First Amendment to say whatever the hell they want to say. See, you see how this is just absolute insanity, and this is untenable? You cannot have a situation where human beings, yes, should have free speech rights. You're individuals, yes. But there is no corporate speech rights. You can't set up a business, do anything, and then when people say, hey, that's illegal, or that's not right, or that's unconstitutional, you respond, oh, you're restricting my free speech rights. You can't set up a murder-for-hire business. You can't set up a prostitution ring. You can't commit brazen fraud and get away with it. But the argument that they're using could easily be stretched to, no, I have the right to say these things, and you can't stop me from saying them, so it's not illegal. It's basically carving out an exception when it comes to crime for companies. Corporations could do whatever they want. Because now you're saying you can't compel speech from them, so you can't do basic consumer protection policies, and they could say whatever they want because they have commercial speech rights, so you can't stop them, prevent them from lying about something or trying to hide information that's pertinent. This is madness. And people really don't realize, man, society is so fragile because there was an era in U.S. Supreme Court history. It's called the Lochner era. And in that era, the Supreme Court ruled that people have what's called a right to contract. And what that means is if you, as an individual, get into some sort of business agreement with somebody and they're your boss, the government has no standing to interfere and say, hey man, you have to meet these bare minimum standards. So in other words, there can't be any child labor. We're not allowing child labor. There's minimum wage protections. There's safety protections that, you have to be provided with certain things in certain fields that are dangerous. During this era, the Supreme Court said, no, the government can't say or do anything. So if an employer and an employee come to an agreement, that's it. The government needs to butt out. So there was no economic regulation at all. And naturally, as I'm sure you would imagine, because you're all very bright people, what would happen is the bosses, the employers, would viciously and ruthlessly take advantage of the fact that there are no rules, and they would these poor employees would get horrendous contracts. They have to work 6 or 7 days a week, no safety protections, no minimum wage protections, no overtime, no nothing. And the Supreme Court said, hey, there's a right to contract. So the government cannot get involved, cannot do regulations, cannot do protections, cannot have minimum wage laws or anything. So there was an era where we had constitutionally enforced extreme laissez-faire, unfettered capitalism. And that wasn't even that long ago. That era ended in the 1930s when FDR came in. So there was people don't understand that all these gains were hard fought and they can go away like that. And with decisions like this coming out of the DC Circuit Courts, it's easy to imagine a situation where we go right back to a Lochner era. and we have like insane unfettered capitalism with no protections. And we're already seeing it now when it comes to speech. You can't make pharma companies or other companies tell the truth about their product because you're compelling speech, and they have a right to say what they want, and you can't stop them because they have commercial free speech rights. That's insane. That's insane. You're legalizing fraud under that framework, and it's crazy to me that this isn't a bigger story.